All right, welcome to Now This Is Podcasting. I'm Connor. I'm here as always with Calvin.
Hello.
And we have Katya with us again.
Hello.
And we're talking about The Bad Seed today. There's a couple different versions of this. We're talking about the 1956 version. This was directed by Marvin Leroy, because the character shares the same last name as him.
Really?
Huh.
Yeah.
That's an interesting character to choose to
To share a name with.
resonate with or emanate yourself by.
And this had a budget of $1 million, and I feel like for the time that's like significant. I feel like that's a lot of money, because I think we looked up, it would have, with inflation, would have been like 10 million or so now. But still, it just feels like to get your hands on $1 million in the 50s feels like
a lot.
a lot. And it made 4.1, so this wasn't like a disaster by any means, but it's certainly like, it's certainly weird. You can tell it's a product of its time. But if we want to like dive more into like why we picked this one, because Katya and I had seen it before, and we were like, Calvin, you got to check it out. So Katya, do you want to kind of explain like why you wanted to watch this and talk about it?
Yeah, this is how my mother let us know that she would murder us if we ever tried to do anything bad. This was her parenting film. This one and that I thought that the movie was this one, but it's the one where the mom like beats her kid with a wire hanger. I think that was a totally different movie.
Yeah, I get them confused too. But
Yeah.
I know what you're talking about.
But I saw both of those under the age of 10. So I watched The Bad Seed multiple times as a kid. And yeah, I just remember it just became this little condensed little package in my head of like, that's a great movie. Mm-hmm. And my mom says these things all the time. So I always just remembered it as being an awesome movie, and watching it as a kid, I was like, it's just such a surprise. Yeah. You'll never guess what happened. Very good.
Fair enough.
There's one scene that's very shocking. Hopefully. But yeah, no, I think that, yeah, you could definitely run into the problem with this one, whereas you're like, man, I enjoyed it so much as a kid, or I thought this was like a good movie as a kid, and then certainly we just watched it together now, and I was like, man, this is like, we were laughing a lot in this movie, and it's supposed to be very serious, I think. It's certainly not a comedy.
Yeah, the laugh started quickly.
Yes.
It really jumped into
Yes.
the corniness of like something that is languishing under the pretense of a stage play. Being put to film. I mean, a lot of film for decades took a long time to come out of the shadow of theater, and this one is one of the, I wouldn't say best examples, because that might suggest it's like good.
It's great.
Like, it's just like it clearly didn't understand how to translate to a different medium. This is a poorly shot play. Like, let alone like a poorly shot film. So I'm glad that we watched it now, because it's awful.
Well, you know, like part of it though is all of these actors being trained as play actors, you know, for the theater.
Yeah, because you were saying these are the same actors.
Yeah.
And actresses,
Yeah, these
right?
are the same actors, because we looked it up.
Nancy Kelly won a Tony for The Bad Seed, like her performance, her stage performance. But yeah, Patty McCormick is in it. Let's see, Aline Heckert, Evelyn Varden, Henry Jones, and Joan Croydon were all stage actors in The Bad Seed who reprised their roles in the film.
So they decided to use them. And I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like probably most people just weren't acting in movies. They weren't as lucrative. I also read here that Patty McCormick was running back and forth between doing this other performance. Like, she had to perform every day. Like, she was doing a live run, or she was working on a show or something. So they were all running all around. There's less actors to go around. Yeah. And that's why their acting is so big, right? Because it's what you do, like, when you're on the theater, on the stage. You're showing your reaction because you have to be very obvious about it. Because you're like, people can't see you close up. But now, with the magic of movies, we get to see them very close.
Yeah, this certainly loses some of its charm, I think.
Yeah.
I think if you went and saw it as a play, you would be like, because I remember you had said that you have seen the actual play, and it all takes place just in one room, essentially. And I think that idea feels like it just comes across as more not kitschy or anything if it's in a play, but if it's in a film, then it's like, oh, they just couldn't build enough sets or something like that. Like,
right.
But they built like the end set all by itself for
which is great.
Literally 30 seconds at the beginning and in the end.
Yeah. Don't go on the dock. I don't know how anyone got on the dock. We told them not to.
It's forbidden.
Yeah, they basically built the outside and the dock and the house. And that was about it.
But I feel like that is, you can tell a cool story on a stage with that, where it's like, we had talked before we recorded how you're like, well, it's about the people's experience with what Rhoda's doing. And like, so then just see them like going over it in this room and having conversations about it, I feel like that probably makes more sense in a play.
Yeah, and it makes it less horrific. You're not like seeing like this man actually being burned alive, which Calvin wanted to see. Leroy get burnt to death.
I just think it would be a novel idea to see a man on fire on a stage.
Yeah.
So I guess before we dive any deeper, I guess like just a little synopsis on the story. There's a family when the father is in the Air Force. He's going away for a month to work in Washington, D.C., and mother and daughter are staying in this apartment, and you slowly realize over time that the daughter, Rhoda, is like killing people. It starts out with a boy named Claude Daigle, who won a penmanship award, and that just set Rhoda off, and so she goes on this like killing spree as the movie goes on. So that's kind of essentially the film, and I think part of what made it so weird to watch is it's supposed to be like it's about a murderous child, but we were laughing so much during it. And so I guess like one of the questions I have is why and what has changed about filmmaking in the 50s, and maybe it's like dialogue and maybe it's delivery, that makes it something that is like an emotional linchpin scene of the film, and like we're laughing through it. Rhoda's played by Patty McCormick, and Christine, the mother, is played by Nancy Kelly, and they both were nominated for Oscars when this came out. So this obviously wasn't a comedy, and people thought that their acting was like at a high level. So, I mean, do you guys have any thoughts on like why do we watch that and think it's funny? But in the 50s, it was like, this is art. This is high art right here.
Yeah, and I think it goes back to the expectations of the stage play. And all of that overacting is like good because it's necessary for a play. Like if you're not going to have mics on everybody needs to be yelling and emoting. And that's just true of a lot of film for a long time until directors started understanding that you had a different sense of space when it's going through the camera. You have a different sense of sound and of perspective that you can change how your characters emote to reflect that. And as film has gotten more and more towards the idea of trying to recreate real life, the actual realism of being in a situation, the more and more that this stuff just seems so goofy. I mean, I have a hard time watching stage plays just in general because like, oh, this is so contrived. Not real.
Yeah, that's
like a contrived like emotions and
like exactly. That's the smart word for all of my sentences.
Yeah, it's like, well, how can I take this play seriously if it looks like the people on stage aren't taking it seriously because the performances are like overblown and over the top. But again, I understand what you mean. It's like, well, that was you had to do that then, and you have to do that on stage. But then when you put it on a film, it's like it does not translate well.
But I think I think they did a little bit of it. I mean, Christine, the mom, she was really good at like tearing up and crying, and like she could do the close-up faces. And I feel like that's probably why people liked Rhoda, because she had all those like creepy eyes.
Yeah.
And when she was being hugged, her face totally changed. And that's something you probably wouldn't be able to see as well in the play. You would get to see like their bodily reactions and maybe like tensing up, but you wouldn't actually get to see her switching back and forth between like smiling, I love you, mommy, and like super straight faced, one eye kind of slit.
Yeah, and it's funny to see how like that's a novel thing for people going to see movies in the 50s. And then we get like performances like, I mean, it's not like a great performance, but it's a really good performance. But Tom Hanks' performance in Castaway, I mean, that entire movie is just a giant monologue. That could have been one of the goofiest movies of all time. And it's a tearjerker for very obvious reasons because they're trying to aspire to a different set of rules for the medium.
Right. Speaking of monologues, that's certainly what this movie feels like. I mean, we go over like nature versus nurture for like what feels like 40 minutes. I mean, it felt like a lecture in a classroom. Like, and we talk about Claude's mother comes in drunk twice in this movie, and it's essentially just recounting the same thing both times. It's essentially the same scene. It feels like she wants to talk to Rhoda about the medal that Claude won. And then we get another scene with Miss Fern, where there's just a big exposition dump about the reason she doesn't trust Rhoda, or she suspects something about Rhoda, and then immediately like doubles back on it when she's called out for it. It's such an odd scene.
I mean,
it's all very weird.
Yeah, like within the same conversation, they're like, "Are you accusing her of having something to do with the Daigle boy?"
Oh no.
Oh no. Like,
would never.
But she's not allowed back at the school. Yeah. Oh, is that because you think she's killed him? Oh, absolutely not.
So the other
but
thing,
she seems like a demon.
Yeah, she's definitely terrible.
It's like, well, I'm not saying she did it, but yeah, she can't come back to school.
I just don't even think anybody wants to, in that sense, just acknowledge that it could exist, right? Like they don't want to even think about it being a possibility.
Which is weird because then they, in like no uncertain terms, say that absolutely this just happened.
Yeah. They still want to like hug her and kiss her. I think my one question though too is about watching the movie and all these back and forths and it being us viewing it so differently. I wonder, we've seen so many movies that I feel like you just learn how to watch a movie. Like Calvin, you can watch a movie that I fall asleep at and you're like, "Oh, this is amazing."
Your face is going.
Did you see that acting? Their face like literally barely moved the whole time, and I got so much out of that movie.
This is the best Calvin impression I've ever seen. So good.
You probably should have pinched your nose a little bit more. It sounded just like...
You just steeple your hands a little bit.
That's the one part you're missing. So like sometimes I feel like when they double explain things or they're acting big, I wonder if people are kind of distracted by just watching a movie. Because you think about Chitty Chitty Bang Bang, people falling out of their seats because it was so crazy. I feel like you still had to kind of learn how to watch a movie and keep up. And you know what I mean? Because I remember watching movies as a kid all the time and being, "This is amazing." And now I've watched so many movies. So I don't know. Maybe that's part of it. I feel like most of it's the play thing. But it did seem weird how they repeated so many things to us.
I do think it's more the play than...
Yeah.
Because we watched Casablanca, and they do... I mean, that's like the same era. I think that came out in like 42, so there's some time between them. But the pacing of that still feels like you're watching a movie. Like, it feels like... It doesn't feel like a play. It feels like you're actually moving from place to place, and things are actually happening, and... There is a lot of dialogue in that too, because they talk so goddamn fast in that movie. So that's still exposition heavy, but this one just felt like some character would come in and they would talk about nature versus nurture, and then a second character would appear and they would give their input on it, and then that character would leave and the conversation would just remain on the same topic, and we've now listened to 15 minutes of the same thing. So I mean, if that's how the play was, then I understand that. That's a tough thing to listen to in a movie.
Yeah. It was hard.
And it's interesting because you can tell that they made no revisions to that script.
Sure.
And then did not understand how to incorporate the cuts and the camera angles in. So they put in the cuts where the scenes ended, and then things just changed after that. Like, okay, they were like, a scene. Okay, now we're going to go into the transition where you walk out. So we're going to go to a different camera. And then it's so abrupt and we're constantly moving around. We have such a different set of expectations about what it means to be looking at it from a different angle, because we assume that, okay, we're going to gain more clarity on this scene, on this on something in the mise en scène. We're going to get something about this character's emotions. Like, I mean, there's at least one cut where when she finds the medal, it cuts to like see her face and zooms in on
zoom,
it.
yeah.
Oh my
Which
gosh.
is the one time it happens. I think it's like the only zoom in the whole movie.
So incredibly amateurish too.
Was there a zoom on the matches though, or was that not a zoom? It was.
That was a great shot though.
I liked the matches.
Yeah, I don't think it was much of a zoom. It might have been a tracking shot where they
Like just follows her.
Followed her, yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, so we expect the camera angles to change to be telling us something. And for them, it was like, this scene is over. This makes a cleaner cut. But man, were there a lot of places where I thought that needs a cut because that feels so goofy. Like when Mrs. Daigle is waving her hand around in people's faces, like that's a cut right there. That is so weird to see on film. If someone goes into emotion, you almost always cut to another angle so you can make it more smooth, because a lot of times that's where actors are going to break right there, or they're looking for a good motion. So you're setting up your camera shots in order to make get the best take and make it feel seamless just in general. When people make lots of cuts, if you're trying to get the most out of it, like a single actor's performance, then you would do that. But they didn't understand how they that space was wrong. They wanted to fit everybody in the camera angle, so putting her so far back in the frame makes it feel funny, because that's how we interpret comedy shots.
Yeah,
the smaller something is in the frame, the more insignificant it feels. But for someone who is used to looking at things on a stage, it just looks like, okay, we got everybody in there. What a great shot. We staged that perfectly.
If you had to compare it to anything that's like modern day filmmaking, it looks really similar to like a sitcom. I mean, that's exactly what it's filmed like, which I understand is like the same basic deal. It's like you're on a soundstage and you have an audience there. So I understand it's like the same thing, but most sitcoms they're comedic. So it makes sense that we interpret that kind of shot as like, oh, this should have something funny going on in it, because that's just kind of the way we're conditioned to see those kinds of shots. So that makes sense to me.
And considering that, I'm really glad, since they couldn't convey a lot with the shots, I'm really glad they held our hand and really foreshadowed everything, so we really understood how it fit together, because I wasn't super sure all the time.
Yeah, exactly.
Like what was going to happen next.
yeah, I do want to talk about, because that was one of my issues walking away from this movie this time around, because I think the first time I watched it, I was just kind of like, I mean, once we get to the end, then it makes the whole journey of the movie before it feel worth it. So the first time I was just like, oh my God, that was the craziest thing I ever saw. Second time around now, kind of looking back on it, it was like, you don't get a single second there's zero ambiguity to the story, I don't think. And especially no ambiguity to the dialogue. Every character spells out exactly what's happening. And anyone who has a suspicion of Rhoda explains in detail why they have the suspicion and why she's guilty. Like Leroy is like I think the most blatant with it, like with his what is it, the bloodhounds.
Yeah,
the stick bloodhounds. They'll find a stick from miles away.
Yeah. And then he goes into depth on like the shoes. He's like, oh, you know what? I heard something clinking in the furnace. And I was like, I bet those are shoes with metal cleats on them. Like, you just thought that, really? Like, there's no moment for anyone in the audience to be like, I wonder what happened.
And he's the only one, I mean, with him, I don't mind him foreshadowing stuff and spelling it out, because he's supposed to be, like dumber than everyone else. Naturally dumb, born dumb. What would you say? So I don't. Yeah,
that boy's born with the case of the dumb. That's like the doctor pulls him out. He's like, oh boy.
But he's just creepy too. He's like this weird, creepy, crusty caregiver that obviously has a family that we never see. So it's like, it's an interesting setup to have him next to Christine, who's apparently a great mother and has this shitty child. Or this evil child, and then he's this just creepster. But he's also like, I'd be okay with him spelling everything out, but it doesn't make sense when everybody's doing it. Like other people have monologues.
Sure.
They should just be like normal people, not foreshadowing and everything. And Leroy could add a really interesting element where you're like, yeah, he's just kind of wacky and trying to frame her instead of being backed up by everybody else in the story.
Right.
Because he should be the most unreliable one.
Yeah. Or I mean, also like another like psychological thing, like he's just an aspect of Rhoda's subconscious. She's like like it's her inner head talking to her like dark passenger.
Oh boy.
Yeah. Like
he's her dark passenger.
Yeah, exactly. This was like Dexter in the 50s. Like that's where they drew their inspiration from was.
I love the girlfriend he gets in that show, and he's like, oh, he's explaining his dark passenger, and she's essentially like, what? That's stupid. Like, it's like my favorite part of the show.
Is that the one with Julia Stiles? The fifth season one? Is that the girlfriend you're talking about?
Yeah, the blonde girlfriend.
And they're like killing other people.
Yeah.
That's funny because she gets to the end, she's like killed all of her, everyone on her hit list. She's like, well, I'm done.
Yeah. It's just like his inner monologue in this dark passenger has been so important to Dexter and that story for so long. And so then to have another character come and be like, that's really dumb.
Yeah.
You should stop that.
She's like, well, I might open a bakery now.
I like what you said, Katya. It feels like Leroy could have actually been a character that made sense and fit in well. Like I
his
think
monologues made sense then because he was talking to himself, creeping around.
I think there's like almost a gem in this movie. It feels like it has a couple cool concepts, and if they were just put together the right way, then it would have been really good. Like if everyone just assumes that he's a creepy weirdo and he's not trustworthy, and he's the only one who's like actually onto her, and he's actually like putting all these pieces together and no one believes him, then that would add some like cool tension into the movie. But like everyone suspects her immediately, it feels like. So
yeah,
there's zero tension.
Yeah, she was not subtle about it. It was not pre-planned. Like, I think the problem I have with this movie is that 45 minutes into the movie, we have just finally
gotten through the shoes.
Gotten through.
Or
not even
we're on the metal still.
Oh, yeah. We're on the metal. They're on the penmanship metal.
Yeah, okay. Exactly. Like she's just been confronted about like the possibility that her daughter's a murderer because she's talking with her teacher and Miss Daigle comes in, and then once they all leave, we are 45 minutes into a movie that should be at the 20-minute mark. It is amazing how much utter crap they jammed into 45 minutes that could have been done succinctly without even words. Like a lot of that stuff doesn't even need to be said. But again, like it's frustrating when I hear things like this movie made 4 times its budget because it shouldn't have been made a movie. It's a good play. I can see the music ruins anything. Even if all of these shots are poorly framed, the music is so cheesy on top of it that it robs every ounce of sentimentality.
I love Au Clair de la Lune though, and I wish Au Clair de la Lune was the only thing they played the entire time.
And it needed to be oppressive, like when it was so loud while Leroy is screaming and
that part's good.
Yeah, like that's a great use of sound design. That is probably what's also in the play, which
that's
is why
the climax of the play. Like that's what I think watching this the second time made me feel weird about, because there were so many like da-da, like there was a few different climax moments where you know what I mean, where things kind of came to a mountaintop. And the only one I remember from the play being like that, like the big kind of breakdown moment, was the music when Leroy was dying. That's when Christine finally cracked. She didn't really crack before then. You know, so yeah, that's the thing. Fun fact about the penmanship medal, by the way, it was an award for the most improved penmanship. And
so
Rhoda's always been perfect, so there's no reason she should have gotten it. Yeah.
Oh.
So Claire,
I feel like that was glossed over.
Yeah, they didn't. I don't think they specified it. They just said a penmanship award.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it makes her just seem like.
Well, now I feel even worse for Claude. He's improving. Like he's getting better. He's got his whole life ahead of him.
He's got a drunk mom. He's doing his best. A little cutie.
I love Mrs. Daigle. She's great though. I like the part where she's wagging her finger in front of Christine's face, like an inch away. It's so goofy, but it's just so over the top.
Yeah.
It makes I would still recommend this. I thought it was still fun to watch it.
Oh yeah.
I mean, it's not. I wouldn't recommend it because you're gonna go see high art or anything.
Yeah, or like you think it's gonna be really scary and a big surprise.
There's like one, I would say, ominous, scary scene, and it's almost at the end where Rhoda's like walking with the flashlight, like along the fence posts and everything, and it's the same piano playing. Like I was like, oh, the one spooky scene in this whole movie. It's like right at the end. I could have done with more of that, I think. But again, I think it's all a product of its time, and I don't know that horror movies were. I mean, they're certainly not made then the way they are now, where you have jump scares and everything's about like how do you set up the music to enhance this scene or whatever. So I understand they're different, but it could have been spookier, I think.
Yeah.
I also think for a lot of people, with the whole nature versus nurture thing, I think that was a really scary thought for a lot of people. And it would be scary to watch this and just be like, I never even thought that this could be the case. Like maybe you'd heard random stories, right? So I don't know. I think that's the scary part, and why they just talk about all the psychological stuff so much, is they really want to drive that part home and make people get nervous about it.
Yeah. It seems to be that's the central tension, is like, oh, it couldn't possibly be her because we know by science that if she's in a good, loving environment that she can't be a psychopath. Of course not.
That was the thing that scared me the most, was so many like a physician says like that's rubbish, that can't be done, that can't be correct. Like there are educated people who immediately took a stance that there is no way it's nature, it's all based on your environment.
Yeah.
And I was like, that's worrying to me, that you're a man of science and you're like, there's only one possibility and I'm putting my foot down, and with that outburst I'm going to retire because my drink is empty. Like,
yeah, but there was a lot of talk about there was some of the talk about the environment too. Like they were a nice family, but I don't think they ever punished her, because they were always like, kiss me, hug me, sweetheart. You know, like
she was
basketball catches.
Perfect too.
And she's always perfect, but that's part of the reason. There was like that weird line about that's why they sent her to Miss Fern's school, because they used, you know, more traditional ways to discipline children
to make them more childlike.
To make them more childlike.
Yeah, that was the problem. Is they felt like she was too perfect, and I feel like there was like some unseemly quality to her perfection,
her unnaturalness.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, they
need to beat her down a little bit.
I think Miss Fern even said, she's like, there's something, or maybe it's Christine. She's like, there's some unnatural quality to your daughter's like maturity and stuff like that.
Yeah,
they like describe her as being unnatural, and there being something off about it.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's why it's weird. We just come in the middle of this conflict when everyone's clearly formed their, like, has all this background with Rhoda and has formed their opinions. Like, we don't just see this kind of like nice, loving daughter-mother relationship that slowly gets soured, or, you know what I mean? Because it doesn't seem like Christine has a lot of choice but to believe that her daughter murdered these people.
Right.
And I'm always really mad that they connect it to the murderer, like, lady, that she was adopted. I just don't think that's necessary. Like, I want it to just be this random evil child.
Well, but I actually think that it works to have the fact that Christine was the daughter of a murderer, because then it does introduce the ideas like, well, maybe it is nature. Maybe that maybe they're all just this line of bad seeds. So I actually like that idea.
I guess
to plant that in your mind that, like, oh, maybe they are just bad because they're bad, and has, you know, it didn't matter that she was in like an affluent family with loving parents. She was always going to be this way. But then you have a bunch of doctors being like, no, it's all environment. So I think it tosses up that like bit of doubt.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Yeah, that makes sense, actually.
And I understand like why you would add that in, is because it's like, well, here's a clear indication, like, you know, everybody gets something from their parents, right? So if this is a serial killer, what if they have a child? Then there's a logical line that some people can be led to believe, like, okay, I can understand that, like why I would come to make that assumption, and then that makes enough sense to me that I can take that as a plot point. But it comes off like so much like a soap opera, like this twist, like, my mother. How do you remember that name, Angled? Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
It's just like, and it's also like a 20-minute scene.
Where she remembers everything.
Yeah, where she remembers everything, and I guess like she was like, I don't know, apparently not a child.
Yeah, I always find it tough in movies where it's like, how convenient for the viewer that we showed up in this person's life just in the nick of time for them to have this like realization. Like you said, it just it feels contrived. None of it feels natural. Mm-hmm. Whereas like if we had known that she was like building to this point where she was going to have this big realization, but it's not. She just like kind of has a breakdown with her dad, and then you find out like there's a chance that Rhoda is a bad seed because she is like a part of a lineage of murderers. So
yeah, and it also gets weird as soon as Christine. I feel like Christine, the mom, never really seems to be aggressive towards Rhoda or anybody at all until like she's like, yeah, my mom was this murderer. And then she gets like, there's a lot of times when she, you know, she's slamming the shoe and breaking the glass. She's shaking Rhoda. She holds her own arms back because like, what am I going to do? That felt kind of weird to me because I'm like, well, has she like felt aggressive before, or she ever thought about killing someone, or did she always kind of think that her mother was this one specific person that was a murderer? So she was like super careful about it. You know, it's like, how much in her life was this? But at the same time, I guess her dad wrote murder, you know, covered murders and all these crimes. So she probably was around it all the time, which is another interesting part of that too. Cause she was probably surrounded by all these crime stories.
That's good. Cause then you could say that that's a part of her environment. So is it her nature or was it nurtured because she was surrounded by
Calvin, there's so many levels.
Yeah.
Oh man.
Wow.
Sorry, that's what this movie is all about.
I still think it comes off not great, but it is good to like explore that and be like, oh, okay, well, because I hadn't thought about that. It's like, well, if she was surrounded by a family that talked about murders all the time, then of course she would have that like suspicion in her head that like that's just what she's surrounded by. That makes sense. I kind of want to move further. Let's get to the end and the moments leading up to that. So Christine has come to grips now that like Rhoda is killing people, and her solution for it is to overdose Rhoda with sleeping pills, and then Christine shoots herself. And they both end up surviving it somehow.
She was wildly ineffective at both counts.
It takes like it seems like it's actually one of the quicker scenes I think in the movie where
surprisingly
they leave the hospital. Christine's still in the hospital, and then the father gets a phone call from Christine. What feels like moments later, she's like, "Oh, they said I'm going to be okay."
Yeah.
And then she, talks about how she's going to have to like atone for these sins and whatnot. And then you get to the end, which is my favorite part, and why I was so excited to have you watch this, Calvin, is Rhoda gets struck by fucking lightning at the end.
Foreshadowed.
It was
foreshadowed by
foreshadowed.
Leroy.
Yeah, multiple talks about the electric chair. Like, oh, they don't put little girls in electric chairs.
Yeah, I
like,
love that.
Oh, but the MPAA does.
Yeah.
It's also like the one thing I did forget about was the revolver, was the gun. That was the only thing that surprised me. I was like, oh, of course she's got to use the gun because they talked about the gun a long time ago. But that's the only thing I forgot. I thought she was just going to take more sleeping pills or overdose on the vitamins.
Yeah, because she was saying that she was going to sleep too, and she got her own pills, and then all of a sudden she shot herself. And I was like, oh, that was unnecessary.
That's a surprise.
But I could believe that then if it's like they were both discovered overdosed on pills. And then they both survived it, but she's got like this goofy wrap around her head. Like it looks like she's wearing an Abbott.
Very glamorous though, still in the hospital. Very war hero.
Very Joan of Arc.
Yes. But yeah, so the reason that Rhoda dies at the end of this, because in the play she lives and Christine dies. But the motion picture production code basically has a provision in it saying that like crimes can't go unpunished in films at the time. So basically like she had to
Law and Order.
Like she couldn't get away with it at the end. So that's why they changed the end of the movie to have Rhoda be struck by lightning, which to me makes so much sense now because it just feels so out of place. Like it just happens out of nowhere. And then the big WB logo comes out and it just says the end. Like that's the movie.
The end. And by the way, don't tell anybody what happened.
I love that. I love that.
Well, apparently in the movie too, they kept the last 5 pages of the script a secret until they were filming.
Oh, okay.
Until they were filming the movie because they wanted the actors to be surprised. And then I just read a interview with Patty McCormick, and when she tried to go watch the movie in theaters, they like didn't want to let her in. They're like, "You're only 10. You can't watch. You can't watch the end of this movie." And she's like, "Okay, by the way, I'm in the movie."
Yeah, that's great.
Kind of thing. They're like, we can't let you see a child get hit by lightning."
But we can let you pretend to be a murderer for the whole time we're filming this. There's no like a...
Which apparently other people ask, like, did you ever want to kill anybody? Like in real life.
In her interviews.
I read that she had said in interviews that it was fun to play that character.
Yeah.
Like be a murderer or whatever, which is spooky.
Yeah, but I mean, it's also like, yeah, of course it's going to be fun because it's overacting. You get to act a completely different way. Mm-hmm. I mean, it allows you to try and be something that other roles don't offer. But I also think it's strange, like that. I mean, so much of the original codes were influenced by morals, right? So it's weird thinking that they were more okay with a child being depicted to be destroyed by lightning than like, oh, but no bad deed should go unpunished.
Yeah.
So weighing those two options, that they ultimately decided, yeah, she needs to get struck by lightning. That's just like the only way we can allow this movie to be printed.
Like they're just communicating back and forth. They're like, okay, we'll let you release it on one condition. She needs to be struck by lightning at the end.
Yeah, she needs to die in an extremely gruesome way.
So I also wanted to point out at the end, there's essentially a curtain call, which is to like harken back to it being a stage play. And apparently at the end of the stage play, Nancy Kelly would spank Patty McCormick at the end because apparently audience members were so upset that Rhoda got away with it at the end in the play that they wanted to send it out on like a lighter note, and they wanted to have like the audience like kind of laugh before they left. Mm-hmm. Like, little Patty McCormick or little Rhoda got what was coming to her, don't worry. And that's why it happens at the end of the movie, because we all got a good laugh out of that, because it feels so weird that she just got struck by lightning.
Oh, strange.
Yeah, she got a smack on the little bum.
She got a little smack on the bum. Which, rolling back to like the whole, getting to play a child murderer and having fun doing that, I guess my question is, which is more common of a fantasy? Being a changeling, like everyone says is a very common fantasy for children to expect they were found, or being a child murderer? Because I definitely thought more about being a child who murders people than being found in the woods when I was a kid. Like, I'm just saying, I never imagined being a changeling.
This is going to be about the bad seed returns.
The sequel.
Katya's revenge.
I don't know. I mean, I just know. I think it'd be fun to think that you have like all this control. I think the weird thing for me about the movie is how it makes her seem like not very smart because it is so obvious and she doesn't do a good job of hiding it. Like, yeah. I just wanted her to be at this time in her life more cunning. Like she'd started so early, she would have figured out better ways to be sneaky by now. You know, like I don't like that she got found out so easy. I mean, she is only 8, but I feel like she should have been better at killing people.
I also love the idea of like her being a product of nature and then nature being like, Yeah. We need to reset that.
Oh, that's true.
You were a mistake.
Lightning's your real mother.
Christine calls her an adroit liar, which is a word I had never heard before. It means clever, skillful, and using your hands or mind. Mm-hmm. And I agree with you, Katya. I wish she was actually adroit then. Like, I wish she was smarter because it seems like if Leroy is like supposed to be some bumbling idiot and he's essentially got her pinned, like he knows everything that's going on, well then it's either that he is just being perceived the wrong way and he's actually a pretty smart guy, or she's the actual bumbling idiot that is being caught.
Then she's being found. That was with Leroy. That was one of my favorite parts, I think, in the movie was where, because he was so weird the whole time and like so pleased with himself, but because he was so spot on, we were like, why are you just like creepily antagonizing this girl that you know she's a murderer? Yeah, you must be really smart. But I liked when he switched and all of a sudden you're like, oh, he didn't know he was right, and now he's kind of freaked out. So yeah, but she was just like telling him, yeah, you're right, basically, like not trying to hide it from him at all. So yeah, I wish she would have been better.
There needs to be
better at being sweet.
More Excelsior and more Leroy in this movie.
just Leroy.
He's so excited to get on his Excelsior bed. Like,
I think he was so excited for pissing her off.
Sure.
Yeah. He's like, I'm smarter, but he's really not. The thing is he's probably barely smarter than the average 8-year-old. So he's really excited when he can best somebody, which is weird. A weird thing.
Speaking of it being an 8-year-old, Patty McCormick was 10 when they filmed this, and apparently there was some issues with the filming because they thought that she looked too old. So they put her in like oversized dresses, and they did her hair a certain way to make her appear younger. I just think that's funny where it's like the discrepancy of 2 years was apparently a big enough deal. They felt like they had to point it out and address it, because if you showed me an 8-year-old and a 10-year-old, I wouldn't know which one's older. So I just think it was funny that there was a deal to make out of it.
I probably would tell which one is older, but I don't know if I'd be like, definitely a 10-year-old.
I guess if a 10-year-old walked up to me and said, I'm 8, I'd be like, yep, you sure are. I wouldn't know.
Does that mean you can smoke yet?
Can you smoke? I can smoke whenever I want. Smoke Leroy. What would you like?
That's great.
Like, but real question, what would you actually do if you found out your daughter was like a murderer? Like, would you had killed that many people and gotten away with it? Like, would you turn them in, or would you like just take care of it yourself? Like, what would be the kinder thing to do, right? To the world and to your child.
For a movie that has been like really corny and overblown most of it, I actually thought Christine's reaction to like she's finally at the end of her rope and she's like, the only thing I can do is, if for the safety of everyone around me, is I need to get rid of my daughter, and I can't live with that. So I also we need to have a murder-suicide scenario here. So I think that's not an unreasonable reaction that she had. Like, what would I personally do? I don't know. True. But I didn't. That was one of the parts of the movie where I didn't watch it and was like, oh, this is just unbelievable. This is out of character, out of place. I was actually like, oh, this is like the first really good bit of acting. Mm-hmm. And it actually seemed to make sense with what was going on.
Yeah, it was actually a natural culmination of all of the emotions that she had displayed of like, I will love you. I don't know what to do, though.
I don't want anyone to hurt you.
But you can't keep hurting more people. Mm-hmm. Now she's seen firsthand someone being lit on fire by her daughter.
Yeah.
I think that really tugs on someone's conscience. So, yeah, it totally makes sense. I think that was the only thing. Like, it was so subtle, really, the way everything was acted. So, yeah, that was a very, very good part of the movie.
Yeah, I was a big fan. I was a big fan of that
And then somehow she missed her face.
Well, it's like maybe she didn't know where to shoot. Like, people didn't have the internet. They didn't know the best spot of the head to shoot. Bullet could have rolled around the skull.
Probably like the center of mass, maybe.
Like, shooting yourself in the eyeball.
Yeah.
She comes out like years later with like all of these guides for how to actually kill yourself if you kill your child.
If I was going to kill me and my child, this is how I would have done it.
Here's how not to survive a self-inflicted gunshot wound. Oh, it's terrible. But anyway.
Okay, last question. What is your favorite quote of this movie? I found it to be... I found it to be pretty quotable. I wrote a couple down that I really liked. Probably my favorite is Miss Butter wouldn't melt fern.
Miss Butter wouldn't melt fern.
I like that a lot.
It's so hard for me to decide because my mom colored all of my memories of all of these quotes.
That was great watching it because I picked this movie up because one of my really close friends, his mom loves this movie, and she kept telling me, she's like, you have to watch it. So that's why I got around to watching it a couple years ago and wanted to, and then I found out like Katya had seen it since she was a kid, and yeah, the whole time we were watching, you're like, my mom says this all the time to me.
Yeah, she's always like, Monica, which is really not a funny quote, but she's just like whenever Christine's calling, she's like, Monica, you have to do something. My mom will just be like, Monica, I don't know what to do. And so many social obligations. That's probably my favorite thing. She's just like, kids these days, so many social obligations.
Yeah, I think my favorite one was unnecessary question.
Yeah, I love that.
Wait, when was that? I forgot that one.
She's asking, Christine's asking Rhoda if her room is clean.
Oh,
and then obviously it's clean because she's perfect. And yeah, I just love because she like looks up to the side and like she's like, oh, that was such a silly thing for me to ask. Unnecessary question.
Yeah, me and my sisters would always look at our mom and just be like, whenever we did something bad or like we were joking around, we'd just be like, you're the nicest mother. I tell all my friends at school that. We tell her that all the time. We'd be like, you're the kindest mother, the nicest mother. And then we just hug her and kiss her. And she's like, get off me.
Like, did you touch her neck and face in the most sinister way ever? Like,
no, we just like hug her and like,
Yeah, you start like hugging her. She's like searching you for matches.
Yeah.
Yeah, where are your matches? Hey, maybe that's why they picked Rhoda up so much too, is because people thought she was bigger. Maybe they kept picking her up because like, did people really pick up kids that much to stare them in the face? I thought the male female relationships in this movie were very strange.
Okay, they were very strange.
All of them were very strange.
I mean, that actually could be one thing that you could say maybe it was environment, because it feels like every single man is a predator, including her own dad.
I wanted to ask if that felt more like because they were meant to be portrayed as predators, or if it's just because it's 2022 and we look at that kind of stuff differently now. And I'm not sure which it is, but it was certainly weird watching some of the interactions with adult men with Rhoda.
Yeah.
Or like
her own father, like talking about like
with daughters.
Yeah. Like her own father talking about, I just make all the girls go crazy.
Yeah.
That's weird by most standards. Yeah. I don't think that's a product of the time. It's just like, why would you say that about your own daughter?
I guess I feel that one feels more common than when Christine calls her dad sweetheart. That feels weirder. Oh, yeah. Sweetheart, like that's.
But I think it's just another example of this type of thing, rather than like taking it by itself. It's like, oh, that's.
Yeah.
I feel like they forgot who was the dad in this relationship.
Yeah. Are there dads in this relationship?
Yeah.
But yeah, because in it, if they were all going to be predatory, like she killed all kinds of people, men and women. She did not discriminate.
Yeah, like the lady in Wichita. I had forgotten about that part. Like rewatching, I was like, oh man, and that was one of the worst exposition dump scenes ever. Christine is like describes in detail just. Remember that old lady that lived across from us, and you had dinner with her that one time, and then she died a few minutes later, and she
fell like goes 5 flights of stairs.
It broke her neck
into the stone courtyard.
It was winter.
It was a lot of words very quickly. It's like no one talks that way. And remember, she had that snow globe, or the bowl. It was the bowl with the fish in it.
Yeah, I think she's just freaking out. Yeah. She could have just said, Rhoda, and just like I don't know, looked at the snow globe.
Be a little more understated.
Yeah.
And then it would be, because then it gives the audience a chance to be like, oh my God, Rhoda she's been a bad seed for a long time. This isn't new behavior.
Yeah.
But no, it's just immediately told to you.
Oh, you know what I wanted to see? Thinking of that, I just wanted to see, like, all of a sudden, mom in Rhoda's room finally talking to her, and all of a sudden, her mom looking at looking at the crystal ball, and then it just like an intense zoom and just being like, ta-ta! And then mom looking like to the other nightstand and seeing something else that's like a trophy and being like, ta-ta! And just looking like at all these things around the room and just having like a ta-ta!
That would be perfect. And that would be like the moment where Guy Ritchie was born.
Oh,
that would have like fit well with, the way the movie was
the vibe.
made. It would have been great. And then it would have made it even more scary for Christine to, as she's coming to that realization. That's a good
because then
tweak
also you didn't need to tell the specific story of the neighbor. You might not have known what the snow globe was, but once you started, like, if you went to the snow globe, to the metal, to like something else, to like something, you would have gotten it. Like, she's killed a ton of people.
Yeah, I would have liked that.
Yeah, I wish she had killed more people.
Yeah, this movie did not have enough murder.
I wish she had like a necklace of teeth.
Oh my god. How's she gonna get the teeth? She's just a little girl.
A clever girl.
She's like, I'm just a little girl. Just a little girl, Calvin.
All right, I think we're getting ready to wrap this one up. On a scale of 1 to 10, how many bad seeds did we sow in this one?
Oh.
So this one's tough. It's one of those things, it's so bad it's good. But it's from the lens of 2022, and we have a different set of standards. If you make something and it ends up being bad, that doesn't mean that it's suddenly good because you just didn't understand what you were making. I think that's a product of reception by the audience. So I think this is fun. I would recommend this heartily to anybody that's like, oh, I don't like horror movies. Like, well, you're going to love The Bad Seed because it's horrifying in other ways.
Yeah.
So as a film, though, it's like a 2. It's like a 2.2.
Okay.
It's bad. It's a bad seed.
Sure. I think I probably land with the same rationale you did. I find this super entertaining, even though it feels like it could be condensed into like a 30-minute like episode of something you just watch on TV. It still was worth it, I think. Especially just for there's so many like good quotable lines and funny overacting, and the climax is wonderful. It's in my top 3 best climax of a movie. The other one would be I love Whiplash. Love the end of that.
Yeah,
that's a great build up. And then I love the end of oh man, what is that Denis Villeneuve movie? The Spiders.
The Spiders?
Oh, Enemy.
Oh,
the end of Enemy, where it's the big tarantula in the room. That's my other favorite ending.
Yeah.
But this one's like right up there with it.
That's crazy because those are all so very different.
I know. It feels wrong to have The Bad Seed up with that like higher echelon of film. But yeah, I love the ending of this. But yeah, I would put it at like probably a 3 in terms of like the movie, but like 10 in terms of entertainment. I love watching this movie. I think it's so much like fun to sit down and like have a good laugh at and be like, wow, movies were different then. Like,
yeah.
Where do you land on this, Katya?
I'm reading reviews right now, trying to decide. No, I'm not trying to decide, but there's one really good one that says, it's hard now to see what all the fuss was about. I feel like that's kind of how I feel about even it's hard now for me to see what all the fuss was about when I originally watched it. Like
young Katya, like why was I so
young
dumb?
Katya thought this was like a 12 out of 10. It was like it was like one of the scariest, most surprising movies I had ever seen up to this point, right? But yeah, it's down there. I'm gonna say 4 out of 10 bad seeds were sown for me in mine own body during this movie.
I think this movie has a lot of cultural impact on your life specifically.
Sure.
Me specifically.
But this still gets a recommend out of you, like.
Oh yeah, I will tell everyone to watch this movie.
Yeah, so I think that's
forever.
That's a good takeaway.
Yeah.
Definitely go watch it, and then make fun of it afterwards.
Yeah.
I think that's like the best use of this movie.
Highly recommend.
All right, with that, we're going to wrap this up. Thanks for being on, Calvin.
Oh, thanks for having me.
And thanks again, Katya, for being here.
Mm-hmm.
And remember...
Thank you. Sorry.
And remember, you can find our podcast on Apple Music and Spotify. We also upload all these to YouTube. So go ahead and leave a comment. Tell us what we're doing well. Tell us what we're doing wrong. And go ahead and leave suggestions in the comments as well. And with that, thank you for listening to Now This Is Podcasting.